They say, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. But words do not need to bruise the skin to leave a scar. Some wounds do not bleed. They echo. You can grow up in a house full of voices and still learn to silence your own. Constant criticism does not always sound like shouting. Sometimes it sounds like, "Why can't you be better?" Like a sigh, like comparison, like love that always comes with correction. And over time, something inside you begins to shrink. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. You begin to doubt your instincts. You rehearse conversations in your head. You apologize for things that were never your fault. Why does criticism linger long after the voice that spoke it has gone silent? Why do some people carry an invisible courtroom inside their minds? This is the silent psychology of those who were constantly criticized, and what it quietly builds within them. Let's begin. There is a particular kind of silence that follows constant criticism. It is not the silence of peace, it is the silence of caution. You learned early that every action might be examined, every word might be corrected, every mistake might be remembered. So you became careful, not because you were weak, but because you were adapting. When criticism is constant, it does not remain external for long. At first, it comes from a parent, a teacher, a sibling, someone with authority. But over time, something shifts. The voice moves inward. And one day, without realizing it, you are no longer being criticized. You are criticizing yourself. You replay conversations in your head. You analyze your tone. You notice micro-expressions on other people's faces and assume you did something wrong. Did you say too much? Too little? Were you too emotional? Not emotional enough? The world becomes a mirror, and you are always searching it for signs of disapproval. This is how the echo forms. Not loud, not dramatic, but persistent, like a courtroom that never adjourns. Inside your mind, there is a prosecutor who remembers every flaw, every misstep, every "you should have known better." And the most painful part? You begin to believe that this voice is you. But it isn't. It is a recording, a repetition of words once spoken often enough that they rooted themselves into your identity. Children are not born doubting themselves. They learn it. When praise is scarce and correction is constant, the nervous system becomes alert, hyper-aware, scanning. You become skilled at reading rooms, at predicting reactions, at shrinking before someone else can shrink you. Outwardly, this might look like humility, like maturity, like being well-behaved. But internally, it feels like walking on fragile glass. You cannot relax fully, because somewhere inside you are waiting for feedback. And even in moments of success, a compliment, an achievement, a small victory, the echo interrupts. It wasn't that good. You could have done better. They're just being nice. Criticism does not disappear when the critic leaves the room. It lingers. It becomes a lens. And through that lens, you measure yourself, always slightly insufficient. This is the quiet inheritance of constant verbal correction. An internal judge, a permanent performance review, a voice that rarely says, "You're enough." But here is the deeper truth. The echo feels permanent because it was repeated, not because it was accurate. And recognizing the echo is the first moment you begin to separate from it. Not all criticism sounds cruel. Sometimes it sounds responsible. "I just want what's best for you. I'm preparing you for the real world. No one else will tolerate this." And as a child, you believed it, because children do not question love. They adjust to it. When correction is wrapped in care, it becomes confusing. You are hugged and then corrected, praised and then compared, accepted but only after improvement. So the message becomes subtle. You are loved, but you are not quite right yet. And if love follows performance, performance becomes survival. Many environments normalize constant critique. Families shaped by fear, culture shaped by comparison, homes where emotional expression felt inconvenient or weak. Maybe your caregivers were criticized too. Maybe perfection was the only language they understood. Maybe vulnerability was something they were never allowed.
So instead of warmth, they offered sharpening. Instead of validation, they offered evaluation. Not always intentionally, but repeatedly. And repetition shapes belief. A child does not interpret constant correction as, they want me to grow. A child interprets it as, something is wrong with me. Even small phrases accumulate. Why can't you be like your sibling? That's not good enough. Stop being so sensitive. You're too much. You're not trying hard enough. Individually, they may seem minor. Collectively, they carve identity. You begin to scan yourself before others do, to criticize yourself before someone else has the chance, to fix what might not even be broken. Because in your nervous system, criticism became predictable, and predictable pain feels safer than unexpected rejection. This is how conditional love quietly forms, not always through absence, but through contingency. You are encouraged but rarely reassured, corrected but seldom comforted. And so you learned a silent equation. If I am flawless, I am safe. If I disappoint, I am at risk. But children were never meant to earn belonging. They were meant to feel it. Yet when love and criticism intertwine, it becomes difficult to separate guidance from shame. And shame, when repeated, does not motivate, it embeds. It settles into the body like sediment at the bottom of a river. You grow older, but the current still carries it. Because what was once spoken to you, eventually becomes how you speak to yourself.
Criticism is not just a memory. It is an experience the body records. When words are repeatedly sharp, dismissive, or belittling, the nervous system does not classify them as just feedback. It experiences them as threat, especially in childhood. The developing brain is not designed to evaluate tone with logic. It is designed to protect connection. Because for a child, connection equals survival. So when criticism becomes constant, the brain adapts. The amygdala, the alarm center, becomes more sensitive. It scans for danger in facial expressions, in pauses, in subtle shifts of tone. You might not even realize it, but your body learned to anticipate rejection before it arrived. That tightness in your chest when someone says, "Can I talk to you?" That rush of anxiety before opening a message, that sudden drop in your stomach when someone sighs. These are not overreactions. They are conditioned responses. Repeated verbal criticism activates the stress response system over and over again. Cortisol rises. The body prepares to defend. But here is the quiet tragedy. There is nothing to fight. You cannot punch a sentence. You cannot run from a tone. So the stress turns inward. Instead of anger, you feel shame. Instead of protest, you feel self-blame. Over time, neural pathways strengthen around certain beliefs. I am not good enough. I am difficult. I always mess things up. I need to try harder. The brain becomes efficient at finding evidence to confirm them. This is how core beliefs are formed, not through one event, but through repetition, like water carving stone. And because the criticism often came from someone important, the brain stored it as truth. Authority plus repetition equals imprint. You may now be in a safe environment. You may be surrounded by people who treat you gently, but your nervous system might still brace for impact. Hypervigilance becomes normal. People-pleasing becomes automatic. Perfectionism feels necessary. Not because you enjoy it, but because your brain learned that mistakes equal disconnection, and disconnection once felt dangerous. So even when no one is criticizing you now, your body remembers what it felt like. This is why healing is not just cognitive, it is biological. The echo you hear is wired into pathways that were built for survival, and survival patterns are stubborn. But here is something important. Your brain adapted to protect you, not to sabotage you. What feels like weakness is actually the evidence of how hard you worked to stay connected. And understanding this shifts the story. You were not too sensitive. Your nervous system was responding exactly as it was designed to. There is a conflict that rarely becomes visible. It does not shout, it does not explode outward. It lives quietly beneath your decisions. On one side, there is a part of you that wants to speak freely, to try without rehearsing, to exist without constant evaluation. And on the other side, there is the internalized critic, careful, watchful,
prepared to intervene. Every time you consider sharing an idea, something interrupts. Are you sure that's smart enough? What if they think you're wrong? What if you embarrass yourself? So you hesitate. You edit before you speak. You soften your opinions. You add disclaimers. You shrink boldness into politeness. Not because you lack thoughts, but because expression once came with consequences. This is the inner war. It feels like walking into every room with two versions of yourself, the authentic one and the protective one. The authentic self wants connection through honesty. The protective self wants safety through perfection. And perfection feels safer. Because if you cannot be criticized, you cannot be hurt. But perfection is exhausting. It demands constant vigilance, constant correction, constant self-monitoring. Even in rest, your mind reviews the day. What did you say? Was it awkward? Did someone misinterpret you? You replay, you adjust, you promise to do better next time. The battlefield is invisible, but the fatigue is real. Over time, this tension creates emotional suppression. You swallow frustration. You minimize your needs. You convince yourself that it is easier to adapt than to assert. But suppressed emotions do not disappear. They accumulate, like pressure building beneath the surface of a volcano. From the outside, you may look calm, competent, composed. Inside, there is strain, a quiet resentment toward the voice that never rests, a longing to feel enough without effort. And sometimes, in rare private moments, the truth surfaces. You are tired of being evaluated, tired of performing, tired of defending yourself against invisible accusations. But even then, guilt appears. Other people had it worse. Maybe I'm just too sensitive. So the war continues. Not loud enough for others to see, but constant enough for you to feel. The tragedy is not that you have high standards. It is that you were never allowed to exist without them. And when self-expression feels dangerous, silence feels safer. Even if silence costs you your own voice.
Perfection does not always begin with ambition. Sometimes it begins with fear. Fear of being corrected, fear of disappointing, fear of hearing that familiar sigh. So you decide, quietly, that if everything is flawless, there will be nothing to criticize. And at first, it works. You achieve, you anticipate mistakes before they happen. You double-check, you triple-check. People may even admire you. They call you responsible, driven, impressive. But they do not see what fuels it. They do not see the anxiety beneath the excellence, the tension behind the smile, the exhaustion that follows every success. Because perfection, when rooted in survival, is never satisfied. It is not about growth, it is about avoidance. Avoiding shame, avoiding rejection, avoiding the possibility of not being enough. You become your own quality control department. Before anyone else can point out the flaw, you find it first. Before someone else can judge you, you judge yourself harder. It feels proactive, but it is protective. And protection has a cost. You may struggle to celebrate your wins because achievement feels expected, not exceptional. You may delay starting projects because if it cannot be perfect, it feels unsafe to begin. Or perhaps you go in the opposite direction. You disappear. You underperform intentionally. You avoid visibility. You shrink your talents because being unseen feels safer than being evaluated. Both are strategies. Overachievement, invisibility. Different masks, same origin. A nervous system that once learned mistakes equal pain. So you build armor out of competence, out of humor, out of compliance. But armor, even when beautiful, is heavy. And beneath it, there is often a quiet question. If I stopped performing, would I still be valued? Would I still be loved? Perfection promises safety, but it also reinforces the original wound. It whispers, you are only as worthy as your output. And when identity becomes tied to flawlessness,
rest begins to feel like failure. Yet here is the hidden truth. The child who learned to be perfect was simply trying to prevent criticism, not trying to outshine, not trying to dominate, just trying to survive emotionally. And survival strategies, even when they look impressive, are still responses to pain.
There is a quiet turning point that does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives as discomfort, a growing awareness that the voice inside your head sounds familiar and not entirely yours. Maybe it happens during a small mistake. You spill something. You forget a detail. You mispronounce a word. And the reaction inside you feels disproportionate, harsh, immediate, unforgiving. For a moment, you pause. Why am I speaking to myself like this? That question is subtle, but it changes everything. Because for years, the internal critic felt like identity. It felt responsible, necessary, protective. But now you begin to notice its tone. It echoes phrases you once heard. It carries the same impatience, the same disappointment. And slowly, a separation begins. This voice is not your essence. It is inherited language. Awareness is uncomfortable, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You start noticing how often you apologize unnecessarily, how quickly you assume fault, how deeply you fear being misunderstood. You see the pattern, and with recognition comes grief. Grief for the younger version of you who believed every correction meant something was wrong. Grief for the moments you silenced yourself to avoid conflict. Grief for the years spent measuring your worth through performance. But grief is not weakness. It is clarity. You realize that self-doubt was learned. It was rehearsed. It was reinforced. And if something was learned, it can be unlearned. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually. The turning point is not about rebellion. It is about discernment. You begin to question the critic. Is this true, or is this familiar? Is this helpful, or is this inherited fear? For the first time, you consider the possibility that your inner voice could sound different. Softer, more patient, more human. The realization does not erase the echo overnight, but it weakens its authority, because authority depends on invisibility. Once you see the mechanism, it loses some of its power. And in that quiet space between the critic's sentence and your response, something new begins to form. Choice. Reclaiming your inner voice does not begin with confidence. It begins with interruption. The moment you catch the critic mid-sentence and decide not to let it finish. At first, the interruption is small, a pause, a breath, a gentle, "That was harsh." You are not replacing the voice, you are simply noticing it, and noticing creates space. For years, the inner critic felt like truth. Now it begins to feel like habit, and habits, even deeply rooted ones, can soften with repetition. You start experimenting with a different tone. When you make a mistake, instead of "you always ruin things," you try "that was human." When you feel overwhelmed, instead of "you're too weak," you try "this is heavy." It feels unnatural at first, almost embarrassing, because harshness once felt like responsibility, and gentleness feels undeserved. But consider this: if criticism built the wound through repetition, compassion can rebuild through repetition too. Neural pathways are not permanent monuments, they are living roads, and roads can be rerouted. Reclaiming your voice also means allowing imperfection to exist without punishment. You begin to speak without rehearsing every sentence, to share without pre-editing your personality, to take up space without apologizing for breathing. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. There will still be moments when the old echo returns, moments when anxiety spikes, when shame whispers, when the courtroom inside your mind reopens. But something has changed. You are no longer a passive defendant. You are becoming your own witness. You begin to see your efforts, your resilience, the strength it took to grow in an environment of constant evaluation. And slowly, a new internal relationship forms, not one of domination, but of dialogue. You can acknowledge your mistakes without collapsing into them. You can improve without insulting yourself. You can strive without stripping yourself of worth. Reclaiming your voice is not about silencing the past.
It is about refusing to let it narrate your present. It is the quiet decision to treat yourself with the patience you once needed. And over time, the echo softens, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer alone.
There comes a day when the silence inside you feels different. Not heavy, not tense, but gentle. The critic may still speak from time to time. Old habits rarely vanish completely, but its voice is no longer the loudest one in the room. Something steadier has taken its place. You begin to notice that you no longer brace for impact in every conversation. You no longer dissect every glance. You no longer carry the invisible clipboard of self-evaluation wherever you go. You are still thoughtful, still reflective, but no longer at war with yourself. And that changes everything. Because when silence softens, creativity returns, playfulness returns, spontaneity returns. You allow yourself to exist without constant correction. You laugh without wondering if it was too loud. You speak without calculating every outcome. You rest without proving you deserve it. There is a quiet dignity in that. Not arrogance, not indifference, just steadiness. You begin to understand that the child who endured constant criticism did something extraordinary. They survived. They adapted. They built armor. They learned to read the room. They tried again and again to be acceptable. And now, as an adult, you are allowed to put that armor down. You are allowed to exist without earning your right to be here. The silence inside you is no longer a courtroom. It is becoming a sanctuary, a place where mistakes are moments, not verdicts, where growth is gentle, not forced, where worth is inherent, not negotiated. And perhaps the most profound shift of all, you no longer confuse harshness with strength. You begin to see that true strength was always in your sensitivity, in your awareness, in your capacity to reflect. The echo that once controlled you becomes just a sound in the distance, and distance changes impact. If parts of this reflection felt familiar, if something quiet inside you was touched, it may be because you have been carrying more than anyone realized. Constant criticism leaves invisible imprints, but you were never too sensitive. You were adapting to survive. And if you are only now beginning to recognize the voice that shaped you, that awareness alone is powerful. You are not alone in this. There are many who grew up in homes where love and correction were intertwined, who learned to measure themselves through impossible standards. This space exists for those quiet realizations, for the unspoken patterns, for the hidden corners of the human heart. If you would like to stay connected to reflections like this, to continue exploring the psychology behind the silence, you are gently welcome here. And if you feel comfortable, you may share your thoughts below. Not because you have to, but because your words might help someone else feel less alone. Sometimes healing begins simply by recognizing that your experience has a name. You deserve gentleness.